Welcome to the Lovecraft Country Discussion Group podcast. This is episode 9, Rewind 1921. We have our illustrious hosts, tailor-made, contributors and moderators, Yeli Ichelli, Mike Richardson, China Moten, and Pamela Wood. This is the Lovecraft Country Discussion Group podcast. Welcome to the show.
All right, let's get right into it. So there were so many themes in this episode, but it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't as cryptic as some of the other ones. They still threw us a couple of little chewy bits. So I feel like in us traveling into Montrose's history, we went right into parenting. Effective parenting, harmful, neglectful, troubled. What do we think about the sacrifice element of parenting in this?
So we saw 3 major sacrifices from parents in this episode. We saw Montrose, and as he watched his upbringing with his father and that abusive relationship, that kind of gave us some insight into him. But in the conversation he had with Tick, we see that he really wanted to be there as Tick's father. And we get that he didn't have a good example for him to, key off of. And that's one of the things that we have to remember as children. Children aren't adults. They haven't had the breadth of experience that we had. They have the parent or parents that they had, or guardians or whoever, and that's their model for parenting. And so we see what Montrose's model was. And so we see him doing the best that he knows how to be there for Tick. Now, he didn't make the corrections that he needed to make, but that didn't change what he wanted to do. So we saw him give up everything. When he's going back to save Thomas, he's saying, look, this is the smallest thing that he can do to not change the timeline, or what he believes to not change the timeline. He's given up his life. He's given up love and everything just so he could perform and be there for Tick. We also see Hip. So Hip comes back in this episode from her trip with Beyonce, and we saw in that episode that she had a choice between her cosmic potential and being back with her family. Now, she didn't choose to go back for George. She didn't choose to go back to her life because she thought all of that was too small. But she gave up all of this cosmic potential so she could come back for D. And so when we see her, like, she could have come back as this entity that could have done anything, but she came back as Hip with the thing still in her wrist because she didn't take that choice. And then we also saw Hattie, who was making another ultimate sacrifice to save her great grandchild, and she burns in the most graphic way, which I think we'll may talk about that later. But she could have saved her family or acted in any way to save any one of them, but she understood and made that sacrifice. And those sacrifices are something that I feel like white supremacy demands of Black people, and has since we've been here, that we have to choose between life and family, or life and that's just something that I don't know, we've gotten used to, but it always seems to be there. It always seems to be the choices that we have to make.
Mm-hmm. China?
Yeah, so the sheer power of matriarchs in the family is what I got from this entire episode, but especially from Hattie. And so in a world where patriarchy means essentially power over others, matriarchy to me is very much inner power. It's power from within. And so it's a nurturing from a cultural, a social, a nature-based perspective, and it places community and support at the center, and it pushes wisdom to the forefront of leadership. And so as soon as I saw Letty being welcomed into Dora's family without a second thought, for, surely for the sake of survival, I thought, what a strong message of community. And so, there's an organized plan in the event of imminent danger. The women in the family were equipped with firearms immediately. And we see Hattie, the matriarch of the family, was tasked with protecting the Book of Names. And so when Letty explains her time travel she's almost like Hattie's almost not even shocked. She doesn't even, there's no, it's like she kind of has this sense of knowing. And so there's just a sense of wisdom and family ties that Hattie inherently knows, and she conveys in a way that only a mother of a family lineage could. And so it honestly made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Like she just understood the weight of the moment and what really needed to be done for the family to go on and to move forward. And so specifically in speaking on the survival and the defense mechanisms that African-American families in general have had to adopt, I feel the Black matriarch was both inherent but very necessary. And so, and especially in my personal experience, it's been the glue that often holds the family together. So I love that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is so important. So one of the things that like theoretically guides my research is this concept called modernity, motherhood in the modern era, but Black motherhood specifically. And one of the things that I saw throughout the whole episode, to China's point, which is so important and so eloquently made, is that there is a primacy of mothering and motherhood in our freedom struggles, you know, not just in our individual families, but looking at families as the basis of our liberation movements, right? So like there is a metaphysical force of motherhood that goes back to Africa. There is a spiritual side and aspect to motherhood, a spiritual power that motherhood has, but also like an ethic of motherhood that thinks about future generations and sacrifices for those future generations. It killed me when the family was calling Hattie while they were burning downstairs, and she did not go and spend her final moments with her loved ones in the house. She stayed up there to carefully like take care of the great greats in the future, right? We think about the Native American cultures, the indigenous First Nations cultures. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, by the way. And, you know, the belief is that, you know, they live their lives today for the 7th generation into the future. But that is also a deeply African concept. Like her future legacy, that unborn of the unborn, those beautiful ones not yet born are what really mattered to her in that moment. And that is the ethic of motherhood. That is the ethic of modernity. There is a concept called badenya in you know, Senegambian culture about that loyalty, that ethic that drives motherhood, that is vital to maintaining freedom in a society. So I just thought, I mean, it was all up and through everything. It was great.
So attached to this, because Montrose was having his own journey, our thoughts on queer parenting.
Yeah, so I think it was an important dialogue that he had with Tick in the alley, where during a time where we see a lot of the narrative suggest that queer people cannot be effective parents, and there's legislation and policy in place to block that. What Montrose was saying was, despite the fact that he had a painful, harmful upbringing by a hetero parent, he didn't let that deter him from actually wanting to be there as Tick's father. He said nothing really could stop that from happening. Despite all of his challenges. I mean, he's given up so much, but he was going to risk it all just to be that child's father. And it wasn't from what we would describe as a traditionally masculine lens, where he's going to be the protector of the family, or Tick is the progeny or the lineage for him as a male to another male. It wasn't any of that. It was just, I love you, and nothing was going to stop me from that. Now, Montrose's love was painful because that was his example. But as a parent, we see that he's fully equipped to love that child, even though he has some learning to do with how that manifests.
Mm-hmm. Any other?
Yeah, I think the show, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I think the show has a lot to say about the queer community and their role within families and communities. I saw a similar message or a related message with Yahima even earlier, about how Yahima was embedded in the community. Yahima was not like some alienated, member that was kind of on the margins of the community, but very core to the community and putting community first. Like the thing that Yahima wanted from Titus was her people back, for them to live. I think in our societies, we think of queer folk and trans folk as people who should be shunned and on the outside, and somehow that this alienates them from basic human values. And these are humans like everybody else, and so we have to understand they want to be parents, they want to have families, they want to play an important role and have responsibility within community. And this is just not how, you know, we think anymore. But you know, in earlier societies, these people were not on the outside of community, they were a part of our communities. We just got some new baggage that we have to deal with.
Right. So along these lines, following this thread, the notion of Black family secrets, like just secrets and things that you don't find out until generations later. And this can include family curses. This can include family, you know, all sorts of little hidden pockets. And how do we respond to those?
I just found it odd that, so first of all, Black families aren't the only families that keep secrets.
Right.
But those secrets seem especially damaging to us, maybe because of our familiarity. We know what's going on. We've seen so many secrets, but this entire family just everyone's keeping secrets. And we see the liberty that comes with the revelation of the secret. So for instance, in Montrose's case, he was suspicious. Everyone hated him. Like, they didn't know what he was doing after he killed Jahima. But, you know, as the secrets come out, there's more empathy towards the character, and he's able to be free with his expression and actually be present with his family. But they just won't stop. I mean, Letty's keeping the secret of giving Christina the pages. They just, Ruby's keeping the secret of her relationship with Christina and William. Tick's keeping all of the secrets for whatever reason, I don't know. But they don't seem to make the connection that there's liberty or freedom in revealing these things. And I think that's something that we should all be challenged with in terms of why do we persist in this myth that the secrets protect us when all of the evidence says otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'm going to be petty, but I'm throwing family recipes in there too, because there are quite a few people that when you start talking about recipes, it gets personal. And they're not coming off of any of those secrets. I'm just going to make it relatable in that sense.
Duly noted. Tell them to go to our stat about family recipes in the cookout.
It's like, just tell us what's in the mac and cheese. Like, I'm still gonna make it my way. I'm sorry, China, your notes.
So I feel like that's so important, because I feel like family secrets and especially racism and the African-American experience kind of almost go hand in hand. And so with one of the themes of this episode being survival and what we as Black families have had to do for centuries just to survive and just to live, the secrets we hold are often justified as protecting each other and protecting our children, you know, from the harsh truths that sometimes lie beneath them. And we see this all throughout this series. People are just, oh, I didn't tell you because I was trying to protect you, and you'll learn when you have a kid of your own. And it just never really quite works. And so going back to slavery, sometimes our ancestors bury the brutal and inhumane events and memories that they experienced to even just cope. And so you definitely wouldn't tell your child that you were owned or beaten and enslaved, you know, by someone else. And it just doesn't go hand in hand with, you know, the idea of family legacy is something you want to pass down. And so, but much to Mike's point, on the flip side of this, there's also the notion that unveiling, you know, these family secrets can be the very thing that breaks that cycle. And so when you can say, you know, a relative and their story and everything that they've been through, there's not only the opportunity to gain a new respect for them, you know, a respect for their honesty and their strength, but also to learn from them and to avoid the same mistakes that they made. And so there's real power and pride in knowing, look, I come from a people who are mentally and physically strong, and then I can then carry that on. And I love that we see this with Hattie passing the torch to Letty, and Letty then carrying that strength and wisdom forward. I thought, you know, especially her walking through the fire, and she has that determination and that extra layer of connection to her ancestors and connection to, you know, that inner power that she probably could not have accessed otherwise.
So I'm going to throw a little wrench in this. Do we think that the fact that Letty is carrying Tick's air, is that the reason for her connection with Hattie? Like, why was it Letty? Why then? Because prior to this, we've been looking for the book. So if we're following this timeline of they went back in time and got the book, I'm lost on that part there. There's like a circle happening here. How did they get the book? Why didn't Letty already have the book if she went back in time to get it? And like, what's going on there?
Well, that's called a causal loop. When time connects with the past and the future, and there's no evidence that Letty went in the past before. Otherwise, she would have the book. Atticus clearly was in the past before because he was the mysterious man with the bat, and then it happens again. But this time, they went into the past through the portal. So now Montrose is going back and Letty is going back, and now Letty is doing something else that wasn't done before, which is obtaining the book. So part where Montrose broke the glass to get the liquor, so he had a bat with him, that supplied Atticus with the bat. That's a part of causality. So he has the bat now, and then he thought something was wrong, but then he jumped right in when he realizes that it's him. I got you, kid. And he goes into the situation. But Letty clearly wasn't there before until they went through the portal. Otherwise, she would have had the book. It's very confusing. It's kind of deep in sci-fi.
If I can add to that, it's funny because I was speaking to somebody in the group about this very thing, and I swear it makes sense in my mind. But when I try and explain it, it just turns into gumbo. So the thing is, I think Letty was always in the past at this very moment. I think that she was always the one who probably...
Oh, you froze. China, we lost you.
There's all these different parallel universes. There's 60 trillion parallel universes that can happen. In this specific timeline, Christina gives Letty the invulnerability. So in other timelines, when Letty goes back, she may not have made it out in time. I feel like she failed and probably died with the family in those other timelines. But in this timeline, they happen to succeed because she has that invulnerability. And that invulnerability spell happened to upset, the balance of nature, and therefore the balance of that timeline, the balance of that universe.
That's straight out of the Matrix. That's straight out of the Matrix.
Straight out of the Matrix. I was like, no, she may have always been there. But in this timeline, when that balance was upset and she had that spell, that's why she's able to walk through, the fire, get out of the house, walk through the fire, walk through those bombs. She would have never made it.
So wait, Mike and I talked about another theory, another approach. And I think Pamela was a part of this conversation too. So my entry point into this is the African, or the specifically the Akan concept of Sankofa, right? A lot of people believe that Sankofa really means just the phrase to look into one's past. You must look to your past to understand your future, like where you're going. But Sankofa is really an African approach to time, and looking at time as non-linear, right? That's a very Western way of looking at time anyway, right? So African folks look at time on a cycle, right? And so this understanding leads us to understand that the past, present, and future are constantly happening and constantly interacting with and influencing each other. So I'm thinking that Letty did go and get the book already, and she was in that scenario in 1921 in Tulsa, but that would then mean that the book is also, I think the book is in the present moment, in the 1955 moment. They just don't know where it is. I think it's misplaced, and they think they have to go back to Tulsa to get it, but maybe they don't really, because she already had got it and just forgot where she put it. Like, it could just be misplaced. Like, let's say they use the book, cure D of the curse, and then put it someplace for safekeeping from, Christina, etc. The book could simply be misplaced, but since they had, they were just kind of dreaming about 1921, they didn't know that they didn't have to go get it. You see what I'm saying? Like, I think all of that could also still be true if we look at it on a loop.
So I think that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Which means maybe they have two. Maybe there's two books in 1955. I don't know. That part is unresolved for me, but I think it's a possibility.
So all of this is theoretical. Until someone actually travels in time, all time travel theories are theoretical. So you can't say it's a bad one or a good one. It's just like death. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't know what happens. As much as a religion will tell you they know, you don't know. So, it's a fun intellectual exercise to go through and figure it out. But there's nothing to be sitting in there arguing about because no one knows. So, we can just have fun with it. And also, there's no rules to how they wrote this. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't say time travel work like this in the Matrix or work like this because, again, they were still making it up as they went along. So I'm fine with all of it.
I was going to say, I think the only time we can rest assured about knowing that time is happening past, present, and future concurrently is when we experience deja vu. That may be the only time we can say, I have been here. I'm supposed to be doing this right at this second, but I've been here before. I think that's the only time any of us can say, I have experienced a little bit of time travel.
Often you'll get premonitions. It's like you're getting a glimpse of what's about to take place, lets you know you're where you're supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I threw that one in. I just couldn't handle it. I know I just went all off script. So, okay, so jumping back, trauma bonding. In all of this time travel, now we have another layer added to this theme of trauma bonding between Tick, what's happening with Letty. Thoughts on trauma bonding with this crew? So
when Montrose says the line, when you go through something like this, the massacre at Tulsa, it forms an unbreakable bond, is what he said, and that's how Dora, George, and Montrose were together the way they were. And that brings out the fact that all of these characters are trauma bonding on some level. They all, whether it's Tick and Montrose and the bond of their relationship, anyone, they're all going through, not the equivalent, but another traumatic event with discovering magic and people dying and Dee getting sick, and all of this stuff is something that's going to bond them together. It's interesting though that Montrose, he returns to the scene of the worst massacre in American history, and what's in the forefront of his mind is his trauma with his father and with who he is as a person. So you got basically a war zone, and all he tells them is, he's like, you don't know what you're in for. But he freezes in his tracks, not because of what's coming on the massacre, but because of the trauma that he has. And so these bonds that they're forming, it makes sense that they're lifelong bonds. And, it also causes me to realize how the current events will make this group bond together now. I just don't know, but it seems like they would have a lifelong bond too.
The trauma bonding made me think of the slave ship. It made me think of this concept of fictive kin that our ancestors had. The trauma bonding began when we were first put in those coffles in Africa and marched out to the coast and put in dungeons and then put on ships. Like, it was to the point where once we got here, the people who had been on the same ship together considered each other like blood, like because of the trauma they had just experienced together, and it became an unbreakable bond. It was like a family bond. And so that's definitely, there are echoes of that in because obviously the trauma didn't stop there. And I think that's really, but that fictive kin is what kept us also at the same time sane in light of all of this, because so much of the African personality is defined collectively as a we, right? Not just simply an I. And so Montrose needs to be a part of a we just as much as anybody else. He needs to feel that connection as a son, as a father, as a husband. He wants all of those bonds, and unfortunately they are characterized by trauma, but definitely at least he acknowledges that once you have a certain bond, that it is unbreakable. And again, just reiterating the fact that family is important. for him and really for all of us if we're being honest with kind of who we are.
Mm-hmm. So, with this trauma bonding, there are several things that we've seen happen. We've seen this Cthulhu, we've seen Jim Crow, we've seen them go through all sorts of different tribulations. What is the connection between Tick as Jackie, basically, because he was the Jackie Robinson of his dream, the connection between Tick as Jackie and Cthulhu in this?
So we said in an earlier episode that in this show, bats are for monsters. And so now we see that Tick is the Jackie Robinson. We suspected it, but we see that he's the Jackie Robinson that occurs in the opening scene of the series. That Jackie Robinson uses a baseball bat to split Cthulhu. And so if Tick is the Jackie Robinson, then what is Cthulhu? Cthulhu is either white supremacy or Jim Crow, that thing that is constantly coming because that Cthulhu regenerated. It seems to always be there. It's the thing that they grab the bats for when the cars are outside the house and those white people are there. It also makes sense that there's a trauma bonding amongst Black people who are victims of this Cthulhu of white supremacy and Jim Crow. We are collectively bound or knit together. And I think it's just something that the show, what I liked about it is that H.P. Lovecraft invented Cthulhu, and we know that H.P. Lovecraft was racist. And so the fact that the writers take H.P. Lovecraft's invention of Cthulhu and make Cthulhu the racism is just a brilliant way to interpret that text and just flip it on its head in a way that was never intended. But it works so well for the characters in this series.
Mm.
Yes.
I like that because I feel like there were a few people wondering, like, well, is Cthulhu just a monster? Like, when is that going to come into play in this? And it's like, it's been there since the beginning. It's just been lurking in the background. I like that analysis of who Cthulhu is. So before we leave Tulsa, any thoughts on this whole pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? Because I feel like inevitably, if you find yourself in a conversation with people about Black economic wealth in America and where we are as a people and why we do this and why this and the riots that happened this year in 2020 and this, Black, the stance and where we have been and what we've tried to build and how many times we've had to build it, always that topic keeps coming up. So what do we think about this representation and seeing this reenactment of Tulsa in the year 2020?
Well, we're almost 100 years, almost exactly 100 years from that event as we stand now. One of the notions that I put out on in the Facebook group earlier was that, this is one of many incidents, one of many massacres of this type. But I think Tulsa is an important example right now because we really are thinking about these important questions of Black self-reliance. It's not simply economic. It's that Tulsa was an independent section of the city in which Black people were not coming to white people with their hands out. They were not dependent on them for jobs. They were not dependent on them for educating their children, going to church, serving their medical needs. This was a self-sufficient Black town, and it was prosperous at the same time because, again, those limitations of trying to integrate where you're not wanted and where there's hostility, they sidestepped all of that. And so that's an example, that's seen as kind of just like this prime example of what we can do when we really do become independent and self-reliant. What do you do when you build your own house instead of trying to knock on the door to get into someone else's? Like, what does it look like? So I think the Tulsa example is something we should be giving serious thought to today in our present environment. I think that's why it's so timely. But I think there are other important messages about Tulsa, like the fact that these Black people were well-versed in weaponry, they had guns, they had self-defense, which is another thing that independent societies and communities have. They have a way of defending the people. That's something we rarely think about. But I think, we should.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just stop there.
And I like that you mentioned that, Eli, because I've been seeing this trending thing with t-shirts and bags and all kinds of stuff that says, "We are not our ancestors, we'll whoop your ass," or whatever. And I'm like, hold up, whose ancestors? Because
man, we really are not our ancestors. When it was time to do the Montgomery bus boycott, that was over an 18-month period where they risked not going to work and getting fired. When it was time to boycott the NFL, these Black people right here couldn't even change the channel for a few hours or so. So we are not our ancestors. You're absolutely right.
Oh, right. We are not even close, and we have fallen from the grace that from the courage, from the bravery.
Yes.
We're still dealing with some of the same dynamics. We're dealing with militarized white racists, and we don't even have the thought about like arming ourselves. Everyone in Dora's household had a gun, right? I think, Pamela, that was the point you made. She was like, "Oh, that's mama's gun." You're like, everyone had a gun of their own, right, in the house. And this is in the wake of World War I. These brothers came home with new training, some new skills. They were organized, and we sit here and we watch MTV and we watch Target commercials and we think this is like this friendly multi-culti society, and and we're not prepared. We're just not prepared for what people who are enemies of our survival are preparing for. And so we could take a page out of this book. I also want to quote Ida B. Wells, who said even decades before this that every Black family should have a Winchester rifle and a place of honor in their home. And those I don't know when we dropped the ball and started thinking that advice doesn't matter, but
maybe the line of demarcation for that might be integration. When we sought integration, not realizing what happens when we integrate and complacency happens. So definitely when the daughter goes, "You know what, that's daddy's gun," the recognition of a click and how a shot goes out of a particular barrel, that shows you how trained they were and how aware they were of how to handle guns. You have a widow, and Nana Hattie is dressed in Edwardian 1921 widow's attire, mourning attire, and she had her gun that fit her hand perfectly. It just wasn't any old gun that she had. She had a gun that fit her hand perfectly. And so the fact that we are so far removed with complacency, as Mike said, you can't even turn the channel off. So we've got quite a stretch to go. And I think we don't have enough time in that stretch to catch up for what may be coming.
Pam, you bring up a good point about integration. Tulsa exists, or this Tulsa exists because of segregation. So in the Greenwood district, just in Tulsa, the Black people would work for the white people in downtown Tulsa, but couldn't spend their money there. So they were forced to go out to the Greenwood district, and that's where they were able to build up their own shops, and white people wouldn't come there. And so that was a place where Black people could be unbothered by whiteness. And so in that unbothered space, they were able to construct this entire district that served and serviced them. And so when you think about the question that you asked Taylor about what are we supposed to take from this? Is there a place right now where Black people can be unbothered by policy and law enforcement? Like, I don't know that exists. And so the bootstrap myth is really that. It's not a thing that you can just, we can just go to this rural community and build it up, because who's the mayor there? Who's the county executive there? All of these things are in place, and that Tulsa was unique, and it was burned down, but it's not a matter of just recreating it, because who's going to leave us alone long enough to do it?
Right.
Who's going to allow us to be uninterrupted?
Right.
And if we were interrupted, where would we be now? Integration changed all of that.
Pam, you had a note about Tulsa and the statues. Because yeah.
You see that the boys meet up at a statue. I wish we could have seen what the statue was, because I believe it was on the white side of town. I think he tells, they know they do to meet up over there. What I noticed Misha has done is that she's given humanity to all of the concepts that are abstracts to us in 2020, meaning the existence of an all-Black town, the street, the occupants. Like, she even gives humanity to Emmett. This gives them all validation to us. So this is what's gotten us kind of fevered about this. So when you validate and give history and physicality to what we consider law, you begin to build lore, you begin to build sympathy, you begin to build empathy, and you put weight to the erasure of our tragedy. And most importantly, our excellence, right? Now, see, it's not that the history of violence, like in episode 1, titularly points out that, first of all, the pyramids, Greek statues have missing noses for reasons. Conquerors work hard to erase symbols of glory to their defeated captors. Why do you think there's so much angst over treasonous statues erected to the Confederacy? It's because even in loss, they have to assert their superiority. Even in the lands of the defeat, the land of the defeat here is the South. Now, as people who tend to be disconnected from our own glorious past, our erection of statues of wins are so few, if non-existent in most of our communities, because we erect these pillars of doctors, businesses, lawyers, and they're immediately erased. They're erased for a reason, time after time. Then we go through this lull, this hush that falls all over us, and we start the cycle again. We begin to build up. We get more lawyers, more doctors. It's not that we can't do it. It's not that we haven't done it. It's that it gets knocked down and burned down each and every time. Mm-hmm. Now, I laugh because try as they might, we keep resurfacing. The spirit cannot die, only be transformed. And we are transformed every time we die. And we will die many times in this one life, but we still keep getting up. And I think that's the whole point. As Letty screams to the ghost, you aren't dead yet. Mm-hmm. You can cast them out. I think that's what Misha's telling us. This recurrent dream we're living, Misha has been dressing and oiling buried bodies. And that's the one thing that they are not ready for. So, did I preach it?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
That's a good
preaching.
So then we have this theme of restoration, it's sounding like. So with this recurring dream, what is going on with the theme of restoration?
So I definitely saw this whole restoration and this regeneration throughout this whole episode. So not only is Dee restored, with the help of Christina, and that curse is reset, but we see restoration happen inversely with Lancaster, where his wounds continuously restore themselves and regenerate instead of heal, which is, the result of that cursed stone that Ruby planted for Christina. And so we also see an important moment, I think, for Letty as her faith is restored. So, she not only speaks, with her child's ancestor, Hattie, but sees how Hattie relies on her faith in dark times, even when her family is in peril. And so it makes me think about how our spirituality is so closely tied to our ancestors. And I know, Ieli, you can speak to this as well. We've seen Letty quote the very scripture, the Lord's Prayer, that she recites with Hattie, but this time it means so much more. And so in a way, Letty is restored through the power of family and can fully understand the strength of that. I feel like the first time she actually feels like, okay, I can stand firm in my faith in a way that she's never been able to say. And so the deepest magic is really to know oneself and to know one's ancestors, the connection and that wisdom. And so in turn, there's also a restoration happening with Montrose and Tick, where Tick actually gets to see Montrose's past and what makes him the way that he is, why he had to do the things he's done out of survival. And so there's an understanding that's generated between the two. And of course, it doesn't justify what Montrose has done, but it allows for a comprehension that they didn't have before. So restoration and regeneration throughout this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This is a good friend of mine in the Facebook group said the ancestors were in the writing room this time, you know, like they had a hand in all of this. And I was telling you guys, like, I teach about this every semester. And this episode hit me like this was new information. Like I just, the first time, like it was just like, oh my gosh, because she brought Tulsa to life. She restored the whole community. You know, she took us to 1921. She took us to the Greenwood district. We had youth going to the prom. She humanized them and breathed life into these people. All the names of real people in Greenwood who were called, when Montrose was reciting those names, I'm like, he is invoking these ancestors for real. That's when my tears came. You know, the Sonia Sanchez poem, Where is Your Fire? As the house is burning, like restoring a spirit, right? Restoring an energy, calling us who are watching, the viewers, to restore a certain fire within our bellies. Like that's the intention. I mean, restoration is happening. There's the restoration of wounds. So not just Lancaster's wounds, but Montrose's wounds. He's to witness all of this happening again. So wounds are being restored. And then, you know, it's kind of like, where do you end up? Do you end up dead on the other side of this as Lancaster does? Or like, are you giving new life to your relationship, Montrose and Atticus, you know? The other form of restoration that I saw was actually Hippolyta. So as was said, Mike, you know, and others, she makes a huge sacrifice to come back from this omniscient, omnipresent, cosmic, what did you say, cosmic potential, which was an excellent way to phrase that. The mother becomes the motherboard, right? So she's got to kind of restore these wounds in her wrists and have this tech in order to, you know, bring forth the portal. But then she is restored as the superhero Orinthia Blue by the end of the episode. She has to call on her power from these other dimensions into herself in order to keep the power lifted, keep the portal open. So her blue hair is restored in this dimension, right? So you know, that means, so there's a restoration even of this kind of like intergalactic mother deity, you know, going on. So everything is getting kind of new life breathed into it. And if it's a bringer of evil, then it's you know, the death is restored and set in place. So I think that there's so much with that. I even saw Letty as kind of play, you know, on both sides of that life death thing, but we'll talk about that maybe in a second.
Mm-hmm. And you know, this might be a bit abstract, but when I saw Hippolyta start sort of manifesting the heroine version of herself, it reminded me a little bit of sort of the power of creation, like following along the lines of, if we are made in the image of our creator, we can create ourselves into being whatever we need to be at any given moment in time. And now that Hippolyta has had this encounter with Beyonce and has learned, you can name yourself and put yourself wherever you need to be. You call to yourself whatever you need at that time. If you need healing, you call that to yourself. If you need to be brave, you call that. And that's what I sensed when she just was just pulling it, just like from the ether. And it just started manifesting in this dimension. And it just gave me sort of a vibe of physical manifestation when you understand who you are as a creative being and your connection to the source. You know, like that was more the vibe I got there.
Oh, definitely. Listen, when you finally connect and it clicks here and in here, they call it the vortex. All the things that you have been calling on to be attracted to you start to come automatically. And I think you're absolutely right. Orinthia realized, again, there's another level for her. At that point, I'm going to lose this or I can go to the next level. Mm-hmm. And she called on those things that she already knew for 200 years. Is that what she told us? She'd been gone about 200. In 200 years, how much knowledge can you acquire? So she literally pulled on 200 years plus of knowledge and brought it into the time frame that she needed it. So absolutely.
And the ability to create is divine. So when we see Dee creating these comics, she's creating something that's real. When we see Hippolyta manifesting or naming herself these things, she's creating. These are divine activities that these characters are participating in. And I think it's beautiful that Hip is able to draw on Dee's divine creativity to create the thing that they need in that moment.
Hey, how about how Christina looks at Dee's drawings? She doesn't give it the love that you know it effing deserves. She's just like, oh, she's definitely gifted.
Yeah, it was kind of like this detached aesthetic evaluation.
But she knows what she's seeing and refuses to acknowledge it to this group of lowly people who need her help, you know? Oh, she's gifted.
Christina's constantly trying to hide their power and their potential from them and act like she don't know how deep it is. But she does. She does, which is why my first question this episode was, why don't they call the Hoodoo lady back? They could have avoided all of this if they just called the Hoodoo lady. I will say that until the end of this show. The goat's blood was still working on that door. Dee's curse could have easily been handled if they had just called Sister Girl back and had her do her thing, but okay. And I think this goes back to Christina. I think she knows a lot more about them than they maybe do. So.
But wait, I thought the Voodoo lady died. Didn't they slap her into the ceiling?
Yeah, she didn't. I didn't think she died.
She just busted up.
Brace.
Okay.
But
I mean, the blood's still working though. You're right.
Can I say this about Christina? She's evil because she knew that she could help. I'll just put it out there. Everybody's trying to redeem her and so forth in the Facebook group, but she's evil. I said it. She's evil. You can't redeem her. She's holding back. She knows Lancaster's still alive. That stone won't let him heal. It's making him regenerate, and then everything's coming apart. And she could have got the blood from him and came back and healed Dee. But no, she wants to cut the deal, get the book, because she wants to win and be immortal. And she does not care. She's on with her agenda. Hence, she's evil.
I think somebody said that too, the commentary of having it within your power to affect change and just choosing not to. And the whole message that's in that.
Yep. They came up with the last episode where Christina reenacts Emmett Till's lynching. Like, she could call off the police. She literally controls the police. And yet she uses a couple cops to kill her in this kind of ceremonial fashion instead of, let me just keep the Black people safe from these racist cops. Like, I have that within my power, but I'm gonna go do this, which is really about recentering me and my experiences. She wants a bunch of firsts. It's still all selfish. So she evil. I'm with you, Justin.
You gotta find out what all of those firsts are about. What's going on with that? Plus, I don't think she had any sympathy for the situation because when she came out of the water, she had this strange cry, laugh, cackle, like she was amused by it or pleasured by it. So again, Christina's evil.
Yeah, she didn't have any sympathy for that. If she did, she would have had Black people kill her. All the mad Black people around there. She got white people to kill her.
Right.
Yep.
So I think our last sort of thing to touch on is this idea of who is Letty? Who is Letty really? Because we've had our theories and Letty is probably going to pull through as the heroine of this, but who is Letty? And the notion of, is Letty a death doula?
Right. So I said earlier today amongst us, I said, can somebody give me a body count? A body count for how many people have passed away that Letty has either been witness to, taught them and said to them, you're okay, you need to cross on over, or held their hands. And I said, she's been performing all of this stuff for everybody Black who's died, who's trapped or can't escape the finality, whatever that may be. And so Yelly said, you know what? She's a death doula. Tell the people what that is, Yelly.
All right. So yes, a death doula is a person who helps people to transition into their departure from this physical plane. This person helps families make, final preparations. They can preside over kind of the spiritual aspects of death. They can literally be the person who sits there and holds one's hand when one is actually dying. And so just like we have birth doulas who help nurture, encourage, organize a mother as she's giving birth, and support her in all of those ways, including spiritual, we have a death doula. And that's a thing that is a part of our tradition that we are just now kind of reconnecting with. And Letty is, and it's so important because remember when the Hoodoo lady calls the name of Oya in that earlier ritual. Oya is the Orisha, the Yoruba Orisha, the deity. It's a warrior deity, a feminine warrior deity, but it's also, she's the mother of the winds of change and transformation. But also Oya is the deity that presides over our death. She is the mother of the cemeteries and the person who witnesses our transition into that next life. Oya is the deity who has gone to death and come back. Oya's colors are what Letty's dressed, that deep red, that's Oya's colors. So she literally is embodying Oya, like as she's walking through those flames at the end, Oya is the wind that fans the flames, right? So I mean, I'm just like, she's embodying this person in all that she does. She holds the hand of Hattie as she's burning up in flames. But these are necessary flames because Hattie must die in that fire in the house. So Oya is almost, she's connected with destiny in that way. And so it's, I mean, there's so much symbolism. I mean, women in African societies are covered with chemwood, which is that deep red color, like when they are giving birth and when they're presiding over certain rituals. And so Oya, even when she's represented in certain movies, you'll see the character that is Oya, her body painted in this reddish ochre color. So Letty as a birth doula, Letty as a pregnant, expecting mother, Letty, presiding over all of these transitions when walls are breaking down and change is happening within the characters. Every time Montrose and Tick have that moment where another wall is broken down, she's just kind of standing there. She witnesses it all. So Oya bears witness to those changes and transformations. And Letty's just, she is Oya in the flesh. And that's why when the priestess calls Oya, Letty goes into action. Letty calls forth the ancestors, and Letty helps them to transition peacefully, be at rest after reclaiming that house. I mean, there's so much, but anyway, yeah. I love this. I love who Letty is showing us that she is in this show.
I got a question.
Yes.
The one you said is covered in all red. You said that's Oya. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how that ties into the red woman that was in the beginning with Atticus in the dream.
Oh, Gia being covered in the red blood. Mm-hmm. Right. Ooh. Because that, I mean, really, that is kind of similar to many depictions of Oya.
Some people think that Gia is going to come back in some form or fashion, because that was just a brief thing in the last episode, which was like, what was that all about? And maybe come back in the next episode and have something to do with saving him of some sort.
It could be, or it could be, remember when Tick tells Gia what we had wasn't real. The real love of his life is Letty. The mother of his child is Letty, right? So maybe he just, in that dream, he thought that this was the woman. He thought it was Gia. But really the real woman is Letty, but he didn't know it at that point, because at that moment when he's dreaming on the bus, he hadn't even encountered Letty yet, or re-encountered her.
Yeah.
If Letty is the real love of his life, then Tick need to step it up. I mean, he ain't take her to no movie or nothing like he did for Gia. He didn't do any of that stuff yet. All he did is not listen to Letty over and over again. So he need to fix a whole lot of stuff.
Like, they trying to live and survive.
They ain't got time to go to the movies.
They're trauma bonding, okay?
So somebody also mentioned, while we're on Letty, that in her dream, Letty was wearing that red dress that she was wearing in Tulsa. So she had a bit of a premonition about burning up in flames in a 1920s dress, pregnant. Right?
Absolutely. What's interesting is that, number one, it's a 1921 prom dress. Red is not a color for 1921 for a prom dress. So this is it's so not by happenstance, as Mike has said to us earlier. Everything has placement in this show. A red dress is just such an oddity, which is why when she busted up in the house, Mama Nana Hattie was like, and then went after her shoes, because women will always remain women. Where'd you get those shoes? You are not of this time. She could clearly see it, whereas everybody else was just concerned about, where's the white man? She zoomed in on something here is not right in this house, and put it in the back of her mind like we all do. Let me just put this fact in the back of my mind. I'm gonna go upstairs later and check on this, So intention. I think I had said something about how we as we stand now in 2020, we have two of the three elements, right? We have the body, we have the blood, but as a people, we do not have the intention. And that is probably the one thing that keeps us from really, really making that move or that leap to being our uninterrupted selves. And when we get there, oh my God, we got two of the three. What's it gonna take?
That's heavy, Pam.
Oh, those sighs.
I mean, I just took it on board. I just started to answer it deep.
Because that's a word. That is a word. What is your intention? That is why that Sonia Sanchez poem,
yes,
that sent me all the way. My daughter was looking at me like, what is happening, mommy? What is happening? Because where is your fire? What is your intent? What are you ready to do? The house is burning down around them, and Sonia comes in and says, where is your fire? We have to fight fire with fire. Are you ready to do that? Right?
Yeah.
Nikki Giovanni had a poem entitled, Nigga, Can You Kill? Can you? What are you really prepared to do? Everyone in that house had a gun and were surrounded. Their intention was to survive at all costs by any means necessary, to protect their futures by any means necessary. Where is your fire? That's a question Sonia Sanchez wrote to Bill Cosby, by the way. She performed that poem in light of some questionable and problematic things that he said. But that question is to all of us. That question was raised in that room for me. Where is my fire? What is our intention? What are we ready to do for our freedom? Everybody else has an answer for that question except Black folks. We need to revisit that question.
Wow. Well, closing thoughts and theories.
Well, just a thought. In another HBO series, Watchmen, it opens with Tulsa and what happened there, and unfortunately, that seemed to wake America up to the fact that this happened. And so that was the question for people who hadn't been educated on it, which is most people, because Tulsa does not appear in your curriculums in grade school. So we watched the Watchmen introduce America to Tulsa, and the question was, that happened? What Misha Green and the writers do here, they humanize Tulsa, as Yeli said earlier. And so the question becomes, that happened to those people that we care about, those characters that we care that happens to them. You see she took you inside there, you see all this affluence, you see all of this movement and energy around this Black community. And so Tulsa's becoming this representative of what America has done to us. And again, like Yeli said earlier, this is one of many. This is one of the worst ones, but just it's important for us to bring incidents like this, like Tulsa, into the consciousness and say, listen, this is the thing that we've been dealing with. You've had all these theories about bootstraps and all this stuff. Look, we've done this before. This is it. And so I appreciate what the showrunners did by humanizing that whole town, whether we knew their names or not. I was just like, man, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. And they bombed this and killed all of these people.
Mm-hmm. I know there were a few people that were shocked at the bombs because they were like, the town's already on fire. That really, they bombed it too? Yes. Yes, they did. Do you think this is overkill? You're watching this thinking, this is overkill. This is not part of the sci-fi. I feel like we say this every week. Like, whatever you think is just absolutely ridiculous in this episode isn't even the sci-fi. That actually happened.
The truth of our history here is a lot stranger than fiction. People would be shocked. And I hope they start to gather that very idea, Taylor. This is the first time that bombs are dropped on US citizens within this country, in our history here. And it's on us. Yeah. And then, then there's the bomb dropped in Philadelphia on the Move house. So, we're the only citizens that have been bombed, as if we were terrorists within our own countries.
On American soil.
On American soil, yep. My final takeaways: trust Black women, protect Black women, get a gun or a bat.
Probably a gun.
At least a bat. Bats are for monsters.
I got a gun that's as long as a bat.
That'll work.
Shotgun.
Something.
Okay.
12 gauge. It's legal. You don't need a license.
Justin.
Go get one.
I think,
Together, for God's sakes, protect each other.
Protect each other. Absolutely.
Don't ask for qualifiers, whether they're your sister, cousin, brother. They look like you? Protect them.
At least check in. Like, to check in, just make, like Maxine Waters. She just pulled her whole car over and she's like, let me just make sure these police are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's like, thank you, Auntie. Just making sure the man's okay.
Right. The families were next door neighbors. They weren't blood, but they came together, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't like, oh, wait. And George and Montrose weren't like, well, she's your prom date. So, like, no, we have to protect each other. We have to look out for each other. And they went go looking for Montrose, right? Like, we have to be interdependent like that again. We have to look out for each other without drawing all these lines. Our ancestors would not have survived if they stuck to some small nuclear model of a family and then was like, I don't care about anybody else outside of that. That doesn't work for us. That's not our stuff.
That's not our stuff.
It's not our stuff.
Every man for himself doesn't work for us.
Never has. We wouldn't be here if we were like that. If that was our natural orientation. Nope.
Last thoughts. Theories. This is the Malibu moment. You can throw your it's not even connected to anything theory out there for the finale episode. We have one left.
Can I just express my total disdain for Ruby? Okay. Ruby gets on my nerves from jump in the beginning of this episode. She pointed the finger at everybody else for dropping the ball with D. She said, all of y'all, when she still got 3 fingers pointing back at herself because Hip specifically put her in charge of D while she was gone. And Ruby dropped the ball. She was getting a sponge bath while D was out there running from the demon doll. And Ruby's on my shit list forever.
She's talking about everybody else supposed to watch her. You're the only one that was naked. So, I mean, what are you talking about?
Hello. All the way on the north side.
And then had the nerve to give Christina her little, I should be on the south side and I should be it. Save it. Save all of it. And then had the nerve to come at Letty talking about her running after a man when she's getting in the car with Christina.
Running after a man and a William, and a man and a woman.
It makes it
William and Christina.
Worse. It just.
Ruby doing too much and too little at the same time.
When Ruby hit her with that, you said, Letty, you sound real stupid right now. I said, who?
Yep.
Yeah, speaking of too much.
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay. Speaking of too much, turned off the gas on Dell down there in the laboratory. Talking about she want to be a redhead now. So would you plan on killing some other woman? You want to be a redhead? You want to be Lucille Ball now?
Right. Like, get a box of hair dye.
I told y'all from the jump that was not the right good looking body. That was a mediocre white woman. I told y'all from the gate.
Bill ain't cute.
Unacceptable.
It makes it that much worse that she's doing what she's doing. She's like, I would rather be.
Like, at the end of the day, is this just like Ruby's just shallow? Is that what we're learning now?
It takes self-care to a whole nother. I'm sorry. It's just.
So it's two
Where's
more
the
things.
line
Well,
between self-care and selfish?
So we don't have to talk about it, but it was interesting that in episode, I guess 1, Letty ran to the car. In episode 2, she swam to the elevator. And this one right here, she ain't had no hustle. And it wasn't just her. Montrose didn't have any hustle either. He walking and stopping every 5 minutes to think about something when they first get there. Hip is trying her best to hold his portal open, and everybody's walking. I hated it. But
No, because Montrose was traumatized.
He was traumatized, right, but he was slow. He was traumatized and he was slow walking to the thing.
Letty had one sprint. Remember when the white guys were chasing
did.
her from the corner?
Right.
She had one good sprint.
Yes.
Right, but that wasn't a saving sprint. She needed to save that book. She walked in the slowest of motion.
Her
White
other
girl
notable sprint is
in a horror film.
Sagas in the first episode, though. That was
She had what? Yeah, she was sprinting, and she had the shoes on. She could have. Well, anyway, I am not looking forward to this being over. Every time the credits hit at the end of the episode, I'm so disappointed. And so now that we only got one episode left, I'm like, man, this is gonna hurt. But I'm really looking forward to it,
And
I'm gonna
Tick
be
has
super
one
sad.
more secret.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yes. Taking after his daddy, having secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this episode was good because I didn't even miss Cinnamon at the end, because that opera song, that piece, like, it hit me in my chest.
It just
Okay.
cut right through.
And the upper chakras too. Like, it was just, I was like, what is this? What is this song?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a custom song for the show. I mean, at least if
Just
you're not
for the
going to give
show.
us Cinnamon.
Yeah, the singer was Janae Ruger.
Wow.
Blew me away. So I'm not ready. I'm ready for and not ready for this to be the last episode, because I don't know what they got for us, but I know it's going to be.
You feel it? Like, I feel like they're about to hit us with it. Like, we've been thinking we've been getting hit, but these weren't the hits. This was, like, slap boxing or something. They're about to just. Yes. Well, there you have it. That was episode 9. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments. Your theories. Give us your Malibu theory. And I'm not even going to give the reference for that. If you know how to use the Malibu, use it. With liberty. Thank you and good night.